Hello, everyone. It's Phil Lee returning with another episode of Civil War Chat. Today is Wednesday, the 11th of January, 2023. Click on the subscribe button down here below to subscribe to future episodes, and then also the notification bell up there in the far upper right to be notified when those episodes are released. Today's topic is, did the Daily Wire wait too long? I'm a big fan of the Daily Wire. I think they are probably more effective than any organization I know of in defending the traditional values and our traditional culture. But I think they've been negligent or, perhaps misguided in their failure to stand behind Confederate statues. I can remember one episode in which Andrew Klavan talked about tradition and the value. I think he was talking about the value of statues, but he was certainly talking about the value of tradition. And he brought to mind a book written by Robert Ruark back in the 1950s, who he was a author who lived in Africa, kind of like living the Ernest Hemingway life. And the book he referred to was Something of Value. It was during the Mau Mau revolution down there, or over there. His point was that destroying a culture is easy, and but building one is much more difficult. And if you're going to destroy a culture, you better be sure that you're going to be replacing it with something of value. So if you don't have anything of real value to replace what you want to tear down, then don't tear down what's there. And also Michael Knowles, who has spoken against the iconoclasts who are tearing down Christopher Columbus statues, has also spoken up for that in more recent years. But my point is that all of this should have started in 2015 when the destruction mobs came after Confederate statues. If they had stood there at that time, or at least as soon as they were organized shortly thereafter as a company to do so, that would have been a good opportunity to stop this trend, or at least put up some resistance that may have never enabled this trend of wokeism to get to the point of destroying statues of Christopher Columbus, William McKinley, Teddy Roosevelt, all that sort of thing. If they had simply just stood behind and said, "Hey, tearing down the Confederate statues is not the right thing to do. It's cultural genocide," but they didn't do that. So I'm just sort of starting off here by talking off the top of my head, but let me go ahead. I wrote a script about this, and I'll just read the script. It's a short one, which I think will make my points. Although I have been a conscientious fan of the Daily Wire for 7 years, they have persistently disappointed me in their weak support for Confederate monuments. In one interview years ago, Ben Shapiro remarked that some of the tanks that freed German concentration camps flew the Confederate battle flag. But ever since, he has been silent on Confederate statuary, even though I suspect that the tradition-prone Southerners were among the first Daily Wire supporters. I can remember I got on them before Trump was elected president, and I can remember them speaking at places like LSU and Texas A&M, University of Alabama. I think in those early years, there was a lot of support in the South for the Daily Wire because the South is traditionally conservative and also values tradition, to a general extent, perhaps more so. I think more so than the rest of the country. So I would not be surprised if in those early years, the Daily Wire had a disproportionate number of supporters in the South relative to its population. But they've been completely insensitive, or almost completely insensitive, to cultural genocide that's happening in the South through the destruction of our monuments, and more recently with the Department of Defense, renaming all the Army bases. Okay, so earlier this week, a Daily Wire reporter posted a story about the Defense Department's proceeding with the removal of Confederate symbols at Army bases and even at cemeteries, and changing the name of the bases. So I responded with an email, which I'll read to you. I have edited that email a little bit since I've had some time to do so after I sent it. Okay, so here's what I sent to the Daily Wire reporter who reported on the DoD moving ahead with the removal of the Confederate monuments and also the changing of the Army base names. Dear Daily Wire reporter, I won't use his name, I'll just say that, Dear Daily Wire reporter, I have regularly used Daily Wire since early 2016. I was briefly a dues-paying member, but left because the Daily Wire generally ignored the hostility against Confederate icons, which has led to their erasure. Confederate soldiers were Americans who lost an internecine conflict over the relative powers of the state and federal governments. While some of the first 7 states to secede listed slavery as a reason, secession was not the cause of the war. The North could have let the first 7 cotton states depart in peace. Instead, it raised an army to force them to return to the Union. That invasion is what caused the war and caused 4 more states from the Upper South to join the Cotton States in their Confederacy. But keep in mind this, despite the devastation inflicted on their homeland during that war, postbellum Southerners more readily volunteered to defend America from the late 18th century to the present day than did people from other parts of the country. Even today, 44% of enlistees are from the South, even though the region has but 36% of the 18 to 24 age group population. It's interesting to note that the selective service system that was started during World War II was partly motivated or partly driven by the fact that the South was providing a disproportionately large number of volunteers. And it would not be fair for them to, bear that extra burden in the war if it was truly a crusade that was something that was important to all of America. So the selective service system was set up to try and get more of a geographical balance in the military services, as well as selecting the people that could be exempted for reasons that were in the national interest and that sort of thing. Okay, so continuing, the DoD is even removing an artistically irreplaceable monument in Arlington Cemetery that was dedicated to North-South reconciliation. A noted British art critic cogently observes that removing that symbol implies there can be no end to the Civil War. The future will interpret the eradication as a license to heap unending humiliation on the legatees of the defeated side and their descendants. As Americans, Confederate soldiers and their descendants do not warrant that humiliation. The veterans from both sides 120 years ago chose reconciliation in the monument in Arlington Cemetery. Today's Department of Defense has no legitimate justification for overruling their interests. Okay, so let me share my screen here. And this is one of my books that I think that you'll find of interest if you haven't seen it before, Trading with the Enemy. During the Civil War itself, there was a lot of trade between the North and the South, even though customarily people think of cotton blockade running as being the principal way of getting cotton out of the South. It turns out that twice as much cotton went from the southern states to the New England cotton mills as went through the maritime blockade to Europe. And this was the trade during wartime. So the interesting thing is that New England was ready to buy that cotton, give Southerners the money for it, and to some extent making them able to go into the international markets to buy weapons to kill Union soldiers. So one of the reasons Trading with the Enemy is a story that you don't see much from the academic press is because there's not any heroes in it. And generally speaking, the academics want to present the whole Civil War story as South bad, North good. And if you've been deep into the trading with the enemy scenario, you find that, yeah, there's no heroes on either side. So they really don't want to talk about it. But it's an important aspect. If you'd like to get a copy of it, you can get it at any bookstore. I think it's $28. If you want an autographed copy from me and you're here in the United States, I'll sell it to you for $32 and I'm covering the postage. But you just have to email me, Phil, PHIL_Lee, LEIGH, at me.com. Okay, that's our show for today. I look forward to seeing you next time.